Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming to my presentation, Oversharing Online, a current examination of vulnerable communication and self-disclosure on TikTok. So I'm broadly going to go over the agenda first. First I'm going to address the problem, then the platform, which is TikTok, and the connection between the two, how they merge together, my analysis. My research today is presented at the conclusion of my master's program here at UConn in the Department of Communication. And then the future implications of my research, what we can do about this, how we can continue the conversation. So first, I broadly just want to go over the scope of this research. What exactly am I doing here? I study health communication and computer-mediated communication. Health communication is generally how people communicate about health, how this may impact our health behaviors, how we may interact between patient and provider, or how we may disclose diagnoses to our families and friends. The list could go on. I study this in the context of computer-mediated communication, which sounds a little bit more complicated than it is, but it is basically communication that is mediated by a computerized device. So we use our cell phones to call people, we use our phones to text people. We perhaps use social media to communicate in various ways. So I study kind of how people communicate about health through CMC. This is what we call computer-mediated communication. So I want to start here. October 19, 2021, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Health Association declared a national emergency on child and adolescent mental health. I bring this to your attention not because the research today is focused specifically on children and adolescents, it's focused on mental health discourse broadly, but this national emergency was declared in 2021, right after the COVID-19 pandemic. Kind of have talked a lot about this, right? There's a lot of discourse about increases in depression and anxiety and some worries about younger people. But this national emergency has not really been at the forefront of recent conversations. I understand we're constantly distracted by the tumultuous state of our democracy and things like that with an upcoming election. But I just want to reiterate the fact that as October 19, 2024 comes, we will be celebrating the third anniversary of a national emergency. So just to put this in context, I'm not here today to talk to you about the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know what it was like, I think, seeing the age in this room. But we know there was a dramatic increase in emergency room visits for suicide attempts and other mental illness emergencies, as well as increased depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality. I don't know that this is such a new topic to people. Mental health workers are at an extreme demand right now, but those workers were actually not so surprised by the staggering increase in statistics at this time, especially because in 2018, suicide became the second leading cause of death for individuals 18 to 24. This is not something new. This problem is just getting exacerbated, becoming worse and worse. So it's an important place to start and an important conversation to have. So I'm interested in kind of the macro approach to mental health discourse. I want to understand how people are talking about it, what the patterns are. I'm not looking at it as much on an individualized level, though a lot of my training is in psychology. I'm trying to understand the broader conversations. And I look at it because a lot of people are talking about this online. So why am I so interested in TikTok? So I am a social media researcher. If you were to ask me, I would say TikTok is an absolutely revolutionary social media platform. We have never been so globally connected. I know a lot of us in here are familiar with this application. A lot of people use it on the daily. It's one of the most commonly used applications. Why is it so interesting? So some researchers at the University of Michigan, Barta and Lili in 2021 came out with a study that showed that TikTok was conceptualized as a just be you platform. That authenticity is like a self-presentation norm on TikTok. So people are showing their truest selves. They're being as honest as we've seen people be on social media. TikTok is a short-form social media platform, so people will post videos. It's a little bit less performative, if you ask me, than an application perhaps like Instagram, where maybe you're showing pictures of yourself, people are showing, kind of milestones or highlights of their life. TikTok, people might wake up and tell a story as they're laying in their bed. They're sharing embarrassing moments. I think some of us have probably noticed this a little bit. People are a little bit more forthcoming, honest, and authentic. Something that's also really unique about TikTok, some researchers, Bandari and BMO in 2022, came out with a study that they interviewed users of TikTok and were asking what was so unique about it. And they were really focused on the algorithm. I do a lot of work looking at the algorithm, right? This big, crazy thing that we're trying to approach, this monster perhaps right now. People were talking about on TikTok that the algorithm is so central to their experience, and that's what really makes it unique from other social media platforms. Sure, the algorithm is involved, right? In our Instagram feeds, it generates what we see. I've recently done some research, which participants reported. I can't see what my friends are posting anymore. It's just showing me, like, what things I want to see. But users kept saying, no matter what I do, I'm continuously redirected to the algorithm on TikTok. The main thing that I'm communicating with on TikTok is the algorithm, and that's through the For You page, which is the most common page that's used on TikTok. This is really unique, not only because it's so heavy on the algorithm, but because we're actually, social media research used to conceptualize as social networking sites, we call them SNS, but the world we're living in today is not, the same Facebook that Mark Zuckerberg made, trying to find people that we already knew from college or perhaps in our social lives and then find them online. Now we're connecting with people that we've literally never met in our lives, and people are talking a lot to each other. A couple more things if you go on TikTok. A lot of us know this, so I know this might be review. But there's exponential topic coverage. If you want to look up literally any illness, any symptoms, which I'm going to get to, any restaurants, any experiences, we see people with all different identities, ethnicities, religions, sexual orientations, geographic locations. We are so interconnected globally, which is a really, really amazing thing. We see a lot of social support on this application, but at the same time, we see a lot of people talking about very sensitive subjects, which is what has inspired my research in my research program right now. I'll briefly touch on algo speak, but basically when people are talking about these sensitive mental health subjects, which I will get to in a moment, for example, the word suicide, which many of us may have seen, they use the word unalive or sewer slide, or they spell the various characters with different characters, like exclamation marks instead of eyes, to circumvent the algorithm. So basically, we can still have these mental health conversations, because TikTok's going to take that down, right? That's against the community guidelines. But there are abundant conversations about these things, and so that's called algo speak. It's a form of net speak, and that's some recent work that came out in 2023. So that's kind of a part of my focus in this research. But I conceptualize what's going on right now as sensitive self-disclosure and vulnerable communication. The exact moment I knew I wanted to pursue this line of work, or at least this project, was when I found the end suicide trend on TikTok. As you can see, it's spelled with exclamation marks. This trend worries me incredibly, and it doesn't stop there. It's all over the place. But essentially, people are having these really detailed conversations about potential past attempts or experiences with mental health crisis in very, very great detail, and kind of sharing these experiences. Yes, they are communicating, they're engaging, they're supporting each other online, but at the same time, I can't help but think, are we sharing just a little bit too much, right? If people are in a vulnerable place or in a very sensitive place in their lives, they're going through something. Is this the content that they should be seeing necessarily? There's not so much regulation on this content. A lot of things in relation to eating disorder recovery. We see people doing days in my life as somebody dealing with anorexia or bulimia. The list goes on. Same goes with addiction, self-harm, and the like. This worries me a lot. What's really interesting is kind of like comparison here is that it's very high in detail, right? People are just talking such intricate detail, really explaining these emotions and things that they're going through, but the networked connection is so low. It's not a network of perhaps a group of friends that are, oh, I feel very close to you and I can disclose this information to you. You're talking to complete strangers on the internet, and these videos have like tens of millions of likes, comments, shares, views. This is like very high trafficked content. So I was like, I kind of want to examine this a bit more. This might be extremely harmful. So what did I study? I pulled 15,500 TikTok comments, and I looked at various communities on TikTok. As a communication researcher, we always emphasize that the theory is very important, so I'll briefly touch on it today. Cultivation theory is perhaps the most cited theory in communication from George Gerbner, University of Pennsylvania in 1969, which basically posits that we base our reality off of what we watch on TV. That's where it started. So we learn about the world based on TV, and this informs the reality that we live in. George Gerbner conceptualized the mean world phenomenon, and this is the reason that people argue this theory isn't as relevant anymore. Because people were watching so much violent content on TV, we're seeing the news, we're seeing all these high rates of crime, and thus they were rating that the world was actually a lot more violent or crime-ridden than it was. So he was seeing this connection between TV, exposure to TV, and then how people are facing their realities. I use this basis that like the content that we watch informs our reality, right? So I'm interested in like this fragmented media society that we currently live in, the media consumption habits, right? I don't watch what you watch, you don't watch what you watch, we all listen to different podcasts, we have different feeds, we get our news differently, right? It is so like fragmented at a hyper rate that it's very complicated right now. So I borrow this concept of speech communities from Dana Goldsmith's normative rhetorical theory, and I have kind of set forth this project saying we have algorithmic speech communities. So I went out, I pulled these TikTok comments, and I looked at about 5 speech communities. I looked at people talking about suicide, I looked at people talking about eating disorders, I looked at people talking about bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And what did I find? I wanted to see if there were any distinctions between the various speech communities. What I found was not super shocking in that respect. The people that were in these various communities, right, and I should say speech communities kind of have shared knowledge, shared meaning, shared ways of communicating, they understand certain experiences that they have. They were talking very specifically about their illness or perhaps what they were going through. That was what was specific to each group. People with bipolar disorder often mentioning, you know, this likely feeling that they often feel invincible or like a superhero that was seen throughout or something like that. People with eating disorders constantly talking about this binge restrict cycle or fear of foods, right? So these are things that we already know based on diagnostic criteria. But what was really interesting to me is across all of these various communities, we saw a lot of similarity. So I have this quote, TikTok really said for you, because people were saying, wow. I mean, I'm sure all of us, and maybe a nod would work, if you have gone on your social media feeds and you're like, I was just thinking about that. How did that just come up? Or I was just talking about that. Or that happened to me today. You see some nods. Yes. So this is happening all over the place. And there were various ways that I saw this happening. One, self-diagnosis was like the immediate reaction for almost, I want to say, I did a thematic analysis. This is a qualitative analysis. I can quantify this, but I would say, as the researcher of this project, that almost across most of the comments were self-diagnosis. I have this. You know, you're talking about premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I was misdiagnosed. This is actually what I have. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but that's not what I have. Oh, wow, TikTok just told me I had an eating disorder. And the like. It goes on and on and on. I saw it across all of the communities. Also, recency in diagnosis, which I think is really interesting in relation directly to the algorithm. Like people said, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder this morning. I was diagnosed yesterday. Or, you know, something similar to that, where I just found this presence of time really interesting, and like, is this the algorithm reading so quickly, right? Identifying through similar others, kind of what we do in regular interpersonal face-to-face social support. My brother goes through the same thing. My father has this diagnosis. My sister, you know, is dealing with similar problems. And then emotional transference, which is a very commonly studied variable in communication. A lot of people reporting, I'm crying right now, or thank you so much, I feel so much love for you on the internet. Like people really like feeling these emotions through the phone, which is very notable. So pretty much all those last ones are seen across the sample, across all of these communities. But there were unique bits about each. So what can future research do about this? I'm currently doing some work, my next upcoming project, whenever this is concluded, is on trauma-informed design. So to bring that into the social media kind of environment, looking at things like trigger warnings, looking at giving a little bit more agency back to the user and how we can have a control over what we see. Clearly, community guidelines are not always working to just like get rid of this content or help us not see things that might be harmful. It's really hard to measure this, right? Because there's a lot of positives to having these conversations, but there's just, you know, it just worries me a little too much. Like, are we sharing a little too much? Should everybody be exposed to this content? So trauma-informed design is something that can be really interesting. I think we plan to like interview people about this to see how they've dealt with this in their lives. We get to ask people to find these kind of things out. I also have a study coming out soon on algorithmic transparency, which basically deals with how transparent social media platforms are about how the algorithm works and how that they're using our data. So perhaps this can make a little bit more sense and we can say, okay, well, this content isn't just right. Just because somebody might have interest in this subject or their data from Google or their email or Instagram suggests that they might want to see this on their For You page, perhaps it's not actually a good idea. This is just such a broad range of there are topics that we can study. The breadth is so large that it just needs to continue. And what can you, a consumer, a friend, a family member or a member of society do about this? I really just want to like spread this information. I think it's quite important. I think it's overlooked. I think a lot of people aren't aware of what's going on necessarily on TikTok, the extent to which these conversations are happening. Like I said, my take is not, do not go on TikTok. Like I said, I think it's a revolutionary social media platform. I think it brings us a lot of good, a lot of connectivity. I think we're exposed to a lot of experiences that we haven't previously been exposed to. This is a beautiful thing. However, I think we just need to approach this very carefully in how we move forward in discussing very vulnerable things, very sensitive things, how we disclose to others when it is a good idea. So just kind of like spreading the word. I think for teachers, this is going to soon become very important if it's not already, friends, parents, and things like that. But essentially, that was my research presentation. I hope to continue working on this. I have left my email if anybody has any questions or wants to continue the conversation. But thank you for listening to my